On Christmas Eve in a small American town, a 9-year-old widow was thrown out of her own home by her children. But at her lowest moment, Jesus Christ himself came to knock on her door. The lights of St. Michael Springs, a quiet mountain town in New Mexico, glowed warm against the winter cold. Families gathered around fireplaces, children unwrapped early presents, and the sound of Christmas carols drifted through the crisp night air. But at the far edge of town, where the street lamps flickered and the snow gathered in lonely drifts, a different story unfolded. One no Christmas song had words for. Inside a weathered wooden house with peeling white paint, Evelyn Ramirez, a 9-year-old widow with trembling hands and aching knees, set a small plate on her kitchen table. On it lay nothing more than a piece of stale bread and a cup of watered-down coffee. Outside, the world celebrated. Inside, silence pressed against the walls like a cold shadow. She kept glancing toward the door, hoping just maybe this would be the year her children remembered her. Robert, with his thriving business in Albuquerque, Beth, living comfortably in a suburban home with a heated driveway, George, always sending photos from Texas, and Patty, too busy with her own family to reply to messages. She had raised them all in this very house, sewn their clothes, worked late shifts so they could go to school, prayed over every meal, every fever, every hardship. But tonight, there were no footsteps running up the porch like years ago. No laughter, no knocks, only the wind, until headlights cut through the darkness. Two cars pulled up sleek, expensive, and out of place in the old neighborhood. Evelyn's heart lifted. This had to be the moment her Christmas changed. She stood, smoothing her worn sweater, rehearsing a smile she hadn't used in months. But the children did not come with gifts or warm embraces. They came with folded papers, cold faces, a decision already made, and Evelyn, still holding on to the hope of a mother's heart, had no idea that before sunrise, Jesus Christ himself would come to knock on a very different door. Long before Christmas Eve became the night her heart broke, Evelyn Ramirez had lived a life built on sacrifice, quiet, unseen, and poured out day by day like water disappearing into dry New Mexico soil. Decades earlier, she had arrived in the United States as a young wife with nothing but a cardboard suitcase, a sewing kit, and the belief that Jesus Christ would guide her steps in this new land. The early years were harsh. Evelyn took night shifts cleaning motel rooms along Route 66, scrubbed floors in diners before dawn, and stitched clothes for neighbors to earn an extra few dollars. Her hands bled from needles, her back ached from bending over sewing machines older than she was, but she never complained. Every cent she earned went toward her 4 children, Robert, Beth, George, and Patty, so they could have the education she never had, the safety she never knew. The people of St. Michael Springs often saw her walking home late at night, coat too thin for the cold, lunchbox empty. "That woman loves her kids more than her own life," Frank Lopez once said, watching her hurry down the snowy street. And he was right. Evelyn gave up new clothes, vacations, even meals some nights, just so her children could grow up without feeling the weight she carried. When her husband died of a sudden heart attack, the town expected her to fall apart. Instead, she became stronger, working double shifts, selling the only jewelry she owned, trusting Jesus Christ for the strength her body didn't have. She raised 4 children, who became successful adults, respected in their communities. But success has a way of erasing memories of who built the foundation. And somewhere along the years, her children forgot the woman who had stitched their dreams together with her bare, trembling hands. The knock Evelyn had prayed for finally came, but not the way she imagined. Outside, the Christmas lights from neighboring houses cast soft colors across the snow, but the expressions on Robert and Beth's faces were anything but warm. They stood at the threshold like strangers uncomfortable with their surroundings, the glow of their luxury vehicles still reflecting off the frosted windows. "Mom, we need to talk," Robert said, not stepping inside, his voice clipped and businesslike. His arms were crossed tightly, the same posture he used when dealing with employees who disappointed him. Beside him, Beth pulled her elegant coat closer around her, eyes scanning the small living room as if she'd never noticed its cracks and wear before. Evelyn smiled gently anyway, the instinct of a mother. "Come in, it's cold. I can make fresh coffee." "We're not here for coffee," Beth interrupted, the impatience sharp enough to sting. "We're here because decisions have been made." Something shifted in the air. The warmth of hope Evelyn carried all day began to drain from her face. She steadied herself against the doorway, as Robert unfolded a set of documents, legal, official, terrifying in their neatness. "This house isn't technically yours alone," he said. "Dad put it under all our names years ago, and we've decided it's time to sell." Sell. The words struck harder than the winter wind. Evelyn stared at her son, the little boy she once carried on her hip now, looking at her like an inconvenience. "But where would I live?" Her voice trembled more from heartbreak than age. "That's not something we can take on anymore," Beth replied. "We all have our own responsibilities. We can't keep worrying about you, Mom." Worrying. As if love had become a burden too heavy for them to lift. Evelyn's knees weakened, but she forced herself to remain standing. Robert extended a pen. "All we need is your signature. By tomorrow." On the night the world celebrated family and love, Evelyn was handed a deadline to leave her own home. And as their cars disappeared into the snowy darkness, the silence they left behind was colder than the December wind. When the roar of her children's engines finally faded, a heavy stillness fell over Street Michael Springs. Snow had begun drifting down in slow, deliberate flakes, gathering on the front steps of the house Evelyn had spent a lifetime turning into a home. She stood there with the unsigned papers still trembling in her hands, unable to breathe, unable to understand how a mother could become a burden overnight. Inside, the Christmas lights flickered on her tiny artificial tree, the same tree she'd used for 20 years. Memories shimmered in its glow. Late-night rapping sessions, little feet running down the hallway, the sound of her husband laughing as he strung lights along the porch. All of it felt like a ghost now, haunting instead of comforting. By the time she gathered the strength to move, the cold had already seeped into her bones. She folded a few clothes into her old cardboard suitcase, the one she brought to America decades ago, and wrapped her thin coat tightly around her. Evelyn took one last look at the home she had protected from storms, repaired with her own hands, prayed over countless nights, then stepped into the winter darkness. No neighbors noticed her as she walked slowly down the street. Through glowing windows, families huddled together opening gifts, sharing meals, laughing over steaming mugs of cocoa. But their warmth did not reach the road where Evelyn trudged, her breath turning white in the air. The American dream she had chased, security, family, a home built with sacrifice, now felt like a distant promise broken long ago. A passing truck splashed slush onto the sidewalk, barely missing her. The driver didn't look her way. To him, she was just another elderly woman walking alone on Christmas Eve, one more invisible soul in a world moving too fast. Her legs ached, her fingers numbed, and each step became heavier than the last. She whispered small prayers through chattering teeth, not knowing if they rose above the wind. All she knew was she could not return home. And as the last streetlight dimmed behind her, Evelyn Ramirez, once a hopeful immigrant, once a proud mother, found herself wandering the margins of the town she had helped build, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a heartbreak too heavy for the cold December night. Past the last row of houses in Street Michael Springs, the road narrowed into a gravel path leading toward the old riverbed, an area most locals avoided after dark. That's where Evelyn's tired eyes caught sight of a small wooden structure, half collapsed, leaning against the frozen landscape like a memory time had forgotten. It wasn't a home anymore. Maybe it never truly was. But to someone with nowhere left to go, it was shelter. Her hands stiff from the cold, she pushed the warped door inward. It groaned like a wounded animal. Inside, the air was damp, carrying the scent of rotting wood and dust untouched for years. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting silver beams onto the dirt floor. Broken furniture lay scattered, an overturned chair, a cracked table, a rusted pot in the corner. Evelyn set her suitcase down and lowered herself carefully against the wall. Her knees throbbed, her fingers trembled, but the deeper ache was inside her chest, where love and betrayal twisted together into something almost unbearable. This wasn't how she imagined her final years. She had survived poverty, widowhood, long shifts that stole the strength from her body. But this loneliness, carved by the hands of her own children, was a wound she couldn't understand. The cold deepened. She pulled her thin coat tighter, but it did little. Her breath turned to fog as she whispered into the silence, "Lord Jesus Christ, are you here? Can you hear me?" The wind pressed through the cracks, carrying no answer. Her eyes drifted to the small wooden crucifix she kept in her pocket, faded, worn, smoothed by decades of prayer. She pressed it to her heart, If my own children won't open their doors to me, she said, voice breaking, will you open yours? If the world has forgotten me, have you? A single tear slid down her cheek, disappearing into the collar of her coat. Outside, the night grew darker. Inside, the last bit of hope flickered like a dying candle. Evelyn curled on the dirt floor, whispering prayers that felt too fragile to rise, prayers she feared might dissolve before reaching heaven. And yet, even in that abandoned house, even in that moment of absolute despair, something unseen had already begun moving toward her in the cold December night. Midnight settled heavily over Street Michael Springs, the kind of cold, starless December night that seemed to swallow every sound. Inside the abandoned shack, Evelyn drifted in and out of shallow sleep, her body curled tightly against the biting air. The old crucifix pressed against her chest felt like the only warm thing left in the world. She didn't know how long she lay there before she sensed it. A pause in the wind, a shift in the silence, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Then came the sound. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, gentle. Nothing like the harsh banging that fear imagines in lonely places. These knocks felt almost polite, as though whoever stood outside didn't want to frighten her. Evelyn's eyes flew open. Her heart thudded unevenly against her ribs. For a moment she lay frozen, unsure if the sound belonged to the real world or the dreams of a desperate mind. Knock, knock, knock. Again, steady, patient. She pushed herself upright, wincing as her joints protested. No one should be out here at this hour. No one even knew she was here. The shack was forgotten, hidden behind miles of brush and cold. Then a voice came through the door. Evelyn. Her breath caught. The voice was male, warm but resonant, each syllable spoken with a calm certainty. It wasn't any voice she recognized. No neighbor, no family, no one from town. She swallowed hard. Who are you? There was a pause, but not of uncertainty, more like tenderness. A friend, the voice said, one who knows what it is to have nowhere to lay his head. The words rippled through the air, ancient and familiar, like scripture whispered beside a dying fire. A tremor ran through her. Evelyn rose slowly and stepped toward the door, her hand trembling as it touched the splintered wood. Please, she whispered, don't hurt me. I didn't come to harm you, the voice answered. I came because you called for me. The door creaked as Evelyn pulled it open. There, framed in the cold moonlight, stood a man in simple clothes, jeans worn at the knees, a white shirt, a brown poncho draped over his shoulders. His eyes held a depth that felt like eternity, and when he lifted his hands in greeting, Evelyn saw them, two circular scars in the center of each palm, glowing softly against the night. Jesus Christ had come to her door. The moment the door opened, a warm hush fell over the abandoned shack, as if the cold itself had stepped back in reverence. The man who stood before Evelyn did not carry the harshness of winter in his presence. Instead, warmth radiated from him, subtle yet unmistakable, like the first sunlight after a storm. He entered without a sound, closing the door behind him. The broken walls seemed to brighten, the shadows softening around his form. Evelyn clutched her crucifix, her eyes fixed on the scars in his hands, faded but unmistakably real. He knelt beside her so their faces met at the same height, his expression filled with a compassion she hadn't seen in decades. You're trembling, he said softly. It's the cold, she whispered. But both knew it wasn't only the cold. Without another word, the man reached into the folds of his brown poncho. From within, he brought out a simple cloth bag and placed it gently on the dusty floor. When he opened it, the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the room, warm, fragrant, alive. Evelyn gasped. She hadn't smelled bread like that since her children were small. He broke a piece and handed it to her. Eat. Her hands shook as she lifted it to her lips. The bread was warm, impossibly warm soft, steam rising from its center. The first bite sent tears streaming down her face. She hadn't realized until now how painfully hungry she truly was. Jesus Christ took a piece for himself, smiling as they shared the humble meal. Then he brought out a small glass bottle filled with clear water. When Evelyn drank, it tasted unlike any water she knew, pure, cool, sweet, awakening something deep inside her chest. What is this? She whispered. Living water, he answered. Strength for the spirit you thought was breaking. Her sobs rose again, but he reached out and cupped her face with scarred hands. Hands that carried the weight of the world's pain, and yet were gentle enough to hold a fragile heart. "You are not forgotten, Evelyn," he said. "Every tear you've cried has been seen. Every wound you carry, I have carried with you." And in that dim shack, filled with broken wood and broken dreams, something inside Evelyn began to heal quietly, deeply, in a way only Jesus Christ could mend. When the last crumbs of bread were gone, and the warmth of the living water settled into her chest, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years: strength. Not physical strength, but a quiet, steady lightness beginning to rise inside her, like dawn easing over a dark horizon. Jesus Christ sat with her on the dirt floor of the shack, his back against the worn wooden wall. Outside, the wind continued its lonely howl, but inside, the air felt still, holy, almost suspended in time. He looked at her with eyes that carried centuries of sorrow and love. "Evelyn," he said, "there is something I must ask of you." Her breath caught. "Anything. You must forgive your children." The words struck harder than the winter cold. Evelyn's hands tightened around the crucifix. "Forgive them?" she whispered. "After what they did? After calling me a burden? After throwing me out on Christmas Eve?" Jesus didn't flinch. His gaze held her gently, the way a father holds a grieving child. "Yes," he said. "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is freeing your heart from the weight meant to break it." She looked away, blinking rapidly as tears blurred her vision. Painful memories rushed forward. Robert's stern eyes, Beth's cold tone, the papers pushed into her hands. "I don't have the strength," Evelyn cried. "My heart is too broken." "You are not asked to do it alone," he answered. "I will give you the strength. You only have to speak the words. Let me carry what you cannot." His scarred hand rested over her trembling one. The warmth traveled up her arm, into her chest, loosening something that had been knotted for far too long. Evelyn shook her head at first, then slowly, painfully, surrendered the fight her heart had been losing. With a voice brittle as thin ice, but honest as prayer, she whispered, "I forgive them." The moment she spoke, the air shifted. The room brightened, though no lantern burned. The cold lifted from her bones. The crushing weight around her heart eased, replaced by a breath of freedom, so unexpected she gasped. Jesus smiled, not in triumph, but in tenderness. "This," he said softly, "is the beginning of your healing." By the time the first pale light of Christmas morning touched Street Michael Springs, Jesus Christ had vanished from the abandoned shack as quietly as he had arrived, but he did not leave it unchanged. Evelyn awoke to a strange warmth, not of blankets or fire, but of peace, deep and steady, resting in her chest like a new heartbeat. She rose slowly, unsure whether the night's encounter had been a miracle or the desperate dream of a broken soul. But when she turned toward the door, breath caught sharp in her throat. There, pressed into the splintered wood of the shack's entrance, glowed the faint imprint of a human hand, and at the center of the palm, a perfect circular scar, luminous as if lit from within. She reached out, fingertips trembling, and touched it. It was warm. Not the warmth of sunlight or fire, but the warmth of presence, of someone who had been there moments before the world woke. Word spread through town faster than the morning bells of St. Michael's Church. It began with Frank Lopez, who passed the road to the river on his morning delivery route. He saw footprints leading toward the shack, one set sharp and defined, the other belonging to an older woman. But only one set returned. "Someone was with her," Frank muttered, parking his truck. When he found Evelyn walking back toward town, clutching her suitcase but wearing an expression he hadn't seen in years, Hope he knew something extraordinary had happened. By noon, dozens of townspeople gathered outside the shack. Some came out of curiosity, others out of reverence. Father Matthew arrived carrying holy water, though even he looked shaken when he saw the glowing handprint. "It's warm," whispered a woman, pressing her fingers to the mark. "It shouldn't be warm," said another. Father Matthew stepped forward and placed his hand over the imprint. A shiver ran through him. "This is not natural," he said quietly. "This feels alive." No one spoke for several moments. Snow drifted gently around them, yet the wooden door radiated gentle heat as though touched by something holy. And as people knelt in the snow, some weeping openly, the truth spread from mouth to mouth, heart to heart. On Christmas Eve, Jesus Christ walked through Street Michael Springs. By mid-afternoon on Christmas Day, the once-forgotten shack near the river had become the heartbeat of Street Michael Springs. Cars lined the gravel road, families gathered in hushed circles, and the glowing handprint on the old wooden door drew people as irresistibly as a lighthouse guiding lost ships. But among the crowd streaming in, four figures stood apart, hesitant, uneasy. Robert, Beth, George, and Patty had driven back into town after hearing rumors so unbelievable they dismissed them at first. A glowing handprint? Mom saw a man with scars? Beth muttered, arms folded. Someone's exaggerating, George insisted, though his voice wavered. Robert said nothing. He only stared at the shack, dread slowly tightening in his chest. When they entered the clearing, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked at the four siblings with pity, others with judgment. Father Matthew approached quietly. "She's inside," he said simply. Evelyn was seated on an old wooden stool just a few feet from the miraculous imprint. Her thin hands rested in her lap, but there was a strength in her posture, a glow on her face that no one had seen in years. When she looked up and saw her children, something gentle flickered across her eyes. Not resentment, not anger, but a painful tenderness. Beth broke first. Her breath hitched, and she pushed through the crowd until she stood before her mother, trembling. "Mom, is it true? Was he really here?" Evelyn cupped her daughter's cheek. "Yes," she whispered. "Jesus Christ was here." Then Robert stepped forward. The man who had delivered the coldest words now struggled to lift his gaze. When he finally met his mother's eyes, the weight of what he'd done collapsed onto him. "I failed you," he choked. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Before Evelyn could speak, Robert dropped to his knees. The sound of it, his knees hitting the frozen ground, silenced the entire clearing. Beth fell beside him, then George, then Patty, crying openly. All four children knelt before their mother, trembling in the presence of the miracle they had denied and the love they had abandoned. Evelyn, her own eyes brimming, placed her hands on their bowed heads. "I forgave you," she said, "before you ever asked." And in that moment, surrounded by snow, witnesses, and the handprint of Jesus Christ still glowing softly behind them, a broken family began to heal. In the days that followed the miraculous Christmas, the abandoned shack by the river, once a place avoided, forgotten, and left to rot, became the most visited spot in Street Michael Springs. What had been a shelter for one broken woman transformed into a destination for hundreds, seeking something far deeper than curiosity: hope. People arrived from nearby towns, then from neighboring states. Some came limping, others came carrying emotional wounds invisible to the eye. All came seeking the warmth they had heard whispered about, the warmth still radiating from the handprint Jesus Christ left on the door. Frank Lopez was the first to propose repairing the shack. "If he walked here," the grocer said, wiping his eyes, "then this place deserves more than broken boards and dust." Father Matthew agreed without hesitation, and soon volunteers poured in: carpenters, retirees, teenagers on Christmas break. They patched the roof, reinforced the walls, scrubbed away years of grime, yet the handprint they left untouched. Even the workers approached it with reverence, whispering prayers as they passed. For no matter how cold the day, the imprint remained warm, glowing faintly like a living ember. Within a week, the shack was reborn as a small chapel. Someone painted the exterior white, someone else donated wooden benches. A local artist carved a simple cross for the wall, and just above the entrance, in graceful letters, they placed the name, Chapel of the Handprint. Evelyn moved into a small adjoining room built just for her. She didn't ask for it, but the townspeople insisted. "This is your miracle, Mrs. Ramirez," a young mother told her, "and you are part of ours." Visitors lined up daily to hear her testimony, how Jesus Christ sat beside her, broke bread with her, held her trembling hands. Some wept when she spoke, others knelt, touching the door for healing, and healing came. A veteran burdened with nightmares said the torment quieted after a single prayer. A man battling addiction found himself freed from cravings he'd fought for years. A couple on the brink of divorce left the chapel holding hands. None of it felt sensational. It felt sacred. In a town once known for little more than its mountain air and quiet streets, a new identity was born. A place where Jesus Christ had walked, and where his miracles continued to flow. Years passed, and the Chapel of the Handprint became more than a landmark in Street Michael Springs. It became the living heart of the town, a place where stories of healing, reconciliation, and renewed faith flowed like steady water through a once-forgotten community. At the center of that stream of grace was Evelyn Ramirez, older now, slower in her steps, but radiant in a way no age could dim. Her children visited often, no longer out of obligation, but out of gratitude. They helped maintain the chapel, served meals to visitors, and prayed beside their mother, the same mother they once pushed to the margins, now the anchor who led them back to Christ. Evelyn never boasted, never blamed. She simply lived gently, her life a quiet echo of the miracle she had witnessed. At 85, Evelyn's health began to fade. She sensed it before anyone else did. One crisp October afternoon, after greeting a group of travelers from Arizona, she returned to her small room beside the chapel and rested in her rocking chair, the same one Patty had given her years before. The sun dipped low, filling the room with a warm golden glow that reminded her of the night Jesus Christ stepped into that abandoned shack. Her breathing slowed, her hands relaxed, and with a peaceful smile she whispered, "I see the light. He's waiting for me." She passed from this world as quietly as a candle, going out yet brighter than any flame. When the news spread, more than 5,000 people came to her funeral, lining the streets with candles, hymns, and silent prayers. Father Matthew said during the homily, "Evelyn did not die. She simply walked into the arms of the one who first walked toward her." Today, the chapel still stands. The handprint still glows faintly. Pilgrims still travel miles seeking the hope Evelyn received. And every Christmas Eve, locals claim they hear soft footsteps near the chapel door, followed by the gentle knock of a Savior who keeps his promises. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Jesus Christ Encounters, so together we can share more true stories of faith, miracles, and the presence of Jesus Christ in our world today.